Herbs. Tiny powerhouse plants almost perfectly built for life indoors. And while some plants in this category are best left outside, such as this giant rosemary here, the bulk of these guys are absolutely suited to grow in your home. Enter the indoor herb garden. Fantastically fresh foliage at your fingertips, ready for your favorite recipes. There's nothing quite like the aroma of lush, growing, and fresh-cut indoor herbs, 365 days a year. And once the realm of the more advanced grower, we'll change all of that today. I'll break down every step, trick, and tip on care for these amazing plants, so that regardless of experience, you can have the most amazing indoor herb garden as well. Other than asking ourselves why we didn't start one earlier, there really is no drawbacks to growing your own indoor herb garden. Whew. Having the freshest herbs at a fraction of the cost is tops on that list, but there's a couple other reasons as well. While you can buy pre-cut herbs at the store, it's often with mixed results. We've all seen the lifeless, listless bubble packs of fresh herbs offered, so you know what I'm talking about. Growing your own means you have the freshest ingredients possible. No more changing your recipes last second to accommodate missing stock. And you'll eat better too. With fresh herbs to add on a whim to any dish, meals take on a whole new flavor. You'll start to tailor your meal choices to match the herbs you're growing, resulting in healthier options and infinitely more taste. There's numerous psychological and physiological benefits to having growing greenery in your home. Add in the fact that it's delicious and that you can eat it. Talk about a win-win. Before we get into the big list of individual herb choices, such as this basil here, and the nuts and bolts of starting your first indoor herb garden, let's go through the checklist of the things that we need to make that happen. And when I say the things we need, I really mean things that the plants need, like soil, water, light, and a container. Let's start with the soil. Although the list of herbs is vast and varied, they all pretty much thrive in the same soil. Loose, airy, rich in nutrients, drains well but retains water, and generally sterile. Avoid the temptation to use your own compost or garden soil, no matter how lovely it is. Bringing outside soil indoors is always a bad idea, and I'd strongly recommend against it. Pest outbreaks are magnitudes more severe indoors, as the selective pressures of outdoor life are removed. With nothing to keep them in check, an outbreak of aphids, spider mites, or even fungus gnats could be devastating. So start with a quality potting mix designed for indoor container gardening. We won't need much, so it shouldn't be a huge expense. You'd be surprised to learn how little water it takes to sustain a vibrant, healthy indoor herb garden, but they always do need to be kept moist. Overwatering plants, especially indoors, and especially with beginner gardeners, is the single biggest cause for failure. Truly. And the reason for this is that we always feel like we need to be doing something for the plants. And it's made doubly worse when those plants are indoors, always in eyesight, always catching our attention. Don't feel bad. You're not the first one to do it. You're not the first one to think, oh hey, that plant looks thirsty. Or, hey, if a little bit of water is good, then a lot of water must be better. Trust me, scale back the watering to weekly or even less for best results. And on that note, we can see why containers play such a huge role in our success. all too often will choose aesthetics over function when growing indoors. Don't make this mistake with herbs. Their containers must be able to drain excess water for the plants to live. Ironically, even stores specializing in gardening and indoor growing sell containers without drainage holes. It's mind-boggling, but not uncommon. Make your own if you see that the container is lacking them. 1/4 inch is just fine, spacing the holes 3 to 4 inches apart. As for container size, it really is dealer's choice. Herbs can grow amazingly large in just a simple small pot due to their highly efficient, fibrous root systems. Go larger if you intend to mix several herbs together, which is totally fine because most of these guys have the same growing requirements. And a biggie size requirement, if not the biggest, is light. For your herbs to look, feel, and taste their best, they need light. 6 hours a day or more of real full spectrum light is recommended. For a lot of us, this means a sunny window is all we need. And for others, we may have to resort to supplementing with an artificial grow light. Fortunately, however, advances in LED technology means that if you do need supplemental light, now more than ever, it's affordable. They're efficient, and most importantly, they're effective. Grow lights work, and they come in every shape, size, and wattage that you could possibly need. And I'll have links down in the description to some of the LED grow lights that I'm using right now. Okay, so just as I've broken down the requirements into its component parts, the actual growing of the indoor herb garden is also done in parts as well. But what do I mean by that? Well, think of it this way. As much as I'd love to just throw a bunch of seeds into a nice container and have an instant herb garden pop up, that's not likely to happen. For starters, even though the adult plants have similar requirements, the seeds sprout and germinate at different rates. Take these two plants here for example, basil and thyme. This thyme here was planted a month before this sweet basil. A month. Compared to the basil, the thyme is growing at a snail's pace. No doubt they can work together eventually because the thyme is extremely long-lived. Once it's full grown and producing, it'll stay like that for a very long time. And the basil is going to do what basil does. It's going to explode with growth right from the beginning, but it might grow so fast, it'll burn out before the thyme is even ready. So that brings us to our first decision. Do we want this magical all-in-one harmonious mixed herb garden? Or do we want individual plants that are interchangeable and modular where we can plant what we want when we want? Aesthetically, I'd say that's personal preference, but I can understand a lot of people are going to want a multitude of herbs in a single planter. Functionally, I say separate puzzle pieces is going to win hands down, allowing you to simply change out spent plants, add on to an existing garden with ease, and experiment with different varieties. And you can do all this without upsetting the overall herb garden. Let's plant both and see firsthand what we're in for. First up, let's grow the all-in-one. Now, we must realize that even though our ultimate goal is a harmonious group of delicious herbs, it's not going to start out that way. Even a multi-planted setup is going to have its component parts grown separately. Let's get those components started so that they can grow while we set up our main container. I start out most of my herbs as either plugs or really small starter plants. Using a quality seeding mix, either store-bought or one you make yourself, fill up some plug trays or small pots. Even paper cups can work as long as they have drainage. Most herb seeds are sown very shallow. Check the package for the suggested planting depths, but usually it'll be a 1/2 inch deep or less. Make a depression and place the seed inside, or place the seed on top of the soil and then cover with a skim coat. It's your preference. Generally, right around 80 degrees Fahrenheit is the optimum range to sprout herb seeds. We won't need to grow the actual plants nearly this warm, but for sprouting, it'll give us the best results. Okay, while the seeds are percolating, let's set up their forever home. For size, depth is ubiquitous, and anything above 6 inches tall will be just fine. Herbs do have extensive root systems, but rarely that singular taproot that dives deep into the soil. For square area though, well, that depends on what you want to grow. I like to give each herb plant a space of about 16 square inches, all to themselves. Basically, 4 inches all the way around. So once you figure out the plants you want, calculate accordingly. Most multi-plant herb gardens are planted with an expiration date. It's just a reality. So if you squeeze in a few more plants than you really have room for, that's okay too. With your container selected, just like our starter pots, we must make sure that the planters drain water. Ideally, manufacturers would realize that watertight containers simply kill all plants, but until then, we'll have to make our own drainage holes. I space my holes 2 inches apart, but I just eyeball it, nothing exact. All right, time to fill. Again, we're going with a store-bought mix, designed for containers. This soil will be slightly coarser than the seeding mix though. As well, it's going to have significantly more nutritional value. I fill up the container based on the size of our starter herbs. Once filled, a great way to get the conditions just perfect is to pre-soak the soil. Just for a couple hours, let it soak up as much water as it'll hold. This is going to allow us to plant the herbs and leave them be, and not have to water them for up to 2 weeks. If your herbs are in plug form, simply fill up the pot the whole way and make plug-sized holes. Drop them in at the spacing we discussed and compress slightly to finish the planting. If you've gone the larger plant route, fill in the bottom of your planter box to a point where the root color of your starter plants is slightly below that of the top of the container. Place your starter plants inside, spaced accordingly, and then backfill with that same potting mix. Keep the plants well lit, either a sunny window or an artificial grow light for at least 6 hours a day or more. Also, keep them at room temperature. Herbs tend to grow at a nice steady rate at around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, regardless of which size you choose, plugs or small pots, I do like to wait until they have multiple sets of true leaves before transplanting. The idea here is that you want the plants to be well started and totally established before you set them loose in the main common container. Replanting one or more that fails is a pain, so that extra care taken at this step is a worthwhile endeavor. For harvesting, well, that's up to the individual plants, but I do like to wait at least 2 to 3 weeks after transplanting before I think about harvesting. I find that the extra time the plants get to establish themselves means even bigger harvests in the long run. By far the easier way to grow and maintain an indoor herb garden is to keep everything separate. Meaning, one variety of herb, one plant per container. Each plant is self-contained and growing independently. This allows us to interchange plants and pots freely, as some plants become spent while others are still going. Each plant is only dependent on itself, and with this individualized attention, it makes life so much easier on the grower. If you're just starting out, this is the method that I'd recommend, hands down. Let's see it in action. You can plant them directly into their final containers, no transition steps necessary. If it doesn't work out or it's a poor specimen, simply try again. Each separate container doesn't affect the one next to it, which is the brilliance of doing it this way. You can go large, such as these 6x6x8 cedar boxes, or smaller, like these little stainless steel sets. Obviously, some herb varieties grow bigger than others, so pick your containers to match the plant. Seeding is much the same in that the seeds are normally planted shallow and kept at around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. During those first few vulnerable days, because of the high temperatures, there's a real risk of these seeds sprouting and then drying out. To combat this, after your seeds are planted, place a piece of wet paper towel over top of the soil, keeping it moist until germination, and then even a few days after. Let those little taproots find their way down and get the plants fully established. It's a brilliant little trick that I cover in more detail in this video here. For most herbs seeded directly in their final containers, because we're not transplanting, we can selectively harvest once the plants get their third set of true leaves. Go gentle at first, only a few leaves or stems at a time. Except of course for basil. And as your herbs mature and become fully grown, they'll actually benefit from this harvest. This pruning is going to encourage new growth and keep the plants from becoming unruly. It's a win-win just by continually harvesting the leaves. You're keeping the plants healthy and constantly growing new foliage in the process. That's the beauty of herbs. And it goes even further than that, because the end of a herb plant, in the sense that we're growing it here, is when it starts to flower. At the end of an annual herbaceous plant's life cycle, it undergoes what we call bolting and sets flowers. This dramatically alters the taste of the leaves if it doesn't stop leaf production altogether. Regular pruning can delay bolting for quite some time. So ironically, by cutting down the plant and enjoying the leaves, we're extending the indoor crops for even more harvest in the future. Amazing. When harvesting from an adult herb plant, the general rule of thumb is to take no more than 1/3 of the leaves or stems at a time. I've done more than that for a few plants, like chives, oregano, and definitely basil, but it's a good rule to follow. Because over-harvesting at one cutting could definitely shock the plant. Continual regular harvest is the ultimate goal with an indoor herb garden. One final aspect that we should touch on before getting to the individual plants is feeding. All this lush growth and continual harvests comes at a cost. Because they're grown in relatively small containers and tend to produce a lot of foliage, which is what we're after, your indoor herbs will need feeding. Almost universally, a low-dose liquid organic boost is the go-to choice. A little bit higher in nitrogen is preferred to not only support foliar growth, but also to not stimulate flowering. I dose after every harvest, which also doubles as a watering. And finally, we come to the plants. The list of herbs is long, with each one more amazing than the next. Of all the ones I've grown indoors over the years, there's 8 that I keep coming back to. Without a doubt, the #1 indoor herb is basil. This Mediterranean member of the mint family is a staple of indoor gardening. Virtually bulletproof and less overwatered. It's often offered in grocery stores as an adult plant, but it's super easy to grow from seed and even easier to grow from cuttings. Germinate basil quite shallow, almost right at the surface, at warm temperatures up to 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the multi-shoot plants that they become aren't from sowing a ton of seeds. While an adult basil plant may look like it's comprised of a bunch of different plants, that's actually not the case. When you harvest basil by topping the stems, it actually produces 2 more shoots in its place. Multiply that over a couple of harvests, and that's how we get massive basil plants. You can harvest all the way down to the first node, but I like to leave at least 2 nodes on, just to be safe. Keep basil at room temperature or slightly above, and try to give them 6 hours or more of sunlight a day. Next on our list is cilantro, or what it's sometimes called, coriander. Native to Southwest Asia, this leafy annual is the epitome of fresh. Seed your cilantro the same way you do basil, right on the surface, with just a skim coat of soil on top. However, with these guys, sow the seeds a little bit more dense, because cilantro are single stem plants. These guys aren't really going to multiply from harvesting like basil does. So we need a higher seeding density to achieve a proper cilantro harvest. Again, do the damp paper towel trick if you find the plants are drying out. Cilantro likes to germinate at warm temperatures, just like the basil does. 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit is ideal. And at that range, the seeds are going to sprout within a week. The first leaves to come up are the seed leaves, or cotyledons. After a few more days, the true broad palmate leaves form, and we're off to the races. Once you start to see the true leaves, drop the temperature down, because cilantro performs much better at cooler temperatures. Cilantro just thrives at moderate, even temperatures, and it's less likely to flower if you keep it cooler. Water weekly or so, but not too much. You can harvest at any time, but because cilantro doesn't really multiply like basil does, let the plants grow. Trim the plants as you need them, taking only as much as your next recipe calls for. Bigger plants left alone for the first little while are going to produce bigger harvests. Using that same high nitrogen booster, feed your cilantro once a month, usually after harvest. This way, they should last at least 3 months, but probably longer, even all winter. One plant I know I said to keep outside, but based on where some of you guys live, this might be your only chance to grow it, and that's rosemary. Judging by the comments I get, there's a lot of people that have trouble growing rosemary outdoors. There are dwarf varieties available, so we can definitely grow this guy inside. I tend not to grow rosemary from seed as it takes way too long. I simply propagate it from cuttings, either by rooting them in water or directly in soil. Give rosemary the biggest pot you can and definitely don't overwater them. Flowering is no problem, as rosemary is a perennial, and it really doesn't seem to affect the taste like other herbs. As an added bonus, rosemary also retains much of its flavor even in dried form, unlike a lot of the other lush plants. Another woody perennial, albeit a little bit smaller than rosemary, is one that tends to die off in the winter in my area, and that's thyme. As a crawling shrub, this Mediterranean aromatic is very tolerant of a range of conditions, and it'll excel in an indoor setting. Thyme thrives indoors, and even though the seeds are super tiny, they're really easy to grow from. But just like rosemary, you can also grow it from cuttings. And not only that, it also keeps that signature flavor even in dried form. Those of you searching for quick herbs to harvest, look no further than chives. As a member of the onion family, chives sprout fast, in and around 5 days. And you know what? They grow even faster. Sow the seeds in groups of 10 to 15 and harvest by cutting them down all the way to within an inch of the soil. They'll come back many times over, giving you fresh chivy flavor all winter long. This next one is a spice monster, and that's arugula. Grown much like small lettuce, sow your arugula heavy right at the surface. This is a fast grower, and it can germinate within 4 days. Keep moist in the beginning to prevent those delicate shoots from drying out. Remember, the paper towel method. And then wait for the second set of true leaves before harvesting. In 5 to 7 weeks, the plant is mature. Harvest the outside leaves first for a continual crop and keep them cool. Arugula performs best when the temperatures are below 70 degrees Fahrenheit. This next one is super easy to grow from either seeds, cuttings, or divisions, and that's oregano, a completely underrated indoor herb in my opinion. Dried, oregano is used all the time, but you just don't hear about the fresh stuff as much as you do the other herbs. Which is a shame, because for one, oregano is ridiculously easy to grow. A member of the mint family, oregano is actually a perennial. Except in colder climates like mine, where it'll go dormant in the winter and then come back on its own in the spring. It does like it hotter and drier than most herbs, but it's quite tolerant of a range of conditions. Its roots are super shallow and it doesn't need much to thrive. Grow your oregano in a small pot in a super sunny windowsill, water sparingly, and pick the biggest leaves as needed. Oregano is the one herb I think we should be bringing back into popularity. And last but not least, we have dill. I'll admit, I used to think this was an outdoor exclusive, but working with dill indoors now for the last 18 months, I've completely changed my mind. Dill is an excellent indoor herb. It grows fast, it's easy to care for, almost no pests, and it has fantastic flavor. Dill is also one that wilts basically the second you harvest it, so buying dill out at the store is something I'll never do. In my climate, dill will grow outside for about 5 to 6 months a year. I do freeze a lot, but once I discovered indoor growing, I never looked back. The seeds are quite large, and they're sown singly about a ½ inch deep. They take 7 to 10 days to germinate, but after that, they grow fast. Even for the small varieties, give your dill plant at least a 1-gallon pot to support this rather large annual herb. Constantly harvest the outside leaves to keep your dill plants manageable and to prevent flowering. Although dill is one of the few herbs, like cilantro, where the seeds are used just as much as the foliage. Room temperature is just fine for dill, although it will appreciate as much light as you can give it. Remember with dill, it's a large single stem plant. I've made the mistake more than once of planting many dill seeds together. Don't do this. Grow it as a single plant and give it a chance to establish itself. Don't worry, it'll branch out and grow plenty big enough for epic harvests. So, there it is, my top 8 indoor herb plants. Take this group of plants that I selected with a grain of flavor though. It is by no means a definitive list. Many herbs are suitable for growing indoors. Consider these 8 plants as a starting point into the world of indoor herb growing, and go or grow from there. Okay, this has been a biggie and a lot to digest, I know. To hammer home the main points for maximum retention, let's do a quick recap to show what we've learned. There's nothing better than picking fresh herbs off the plants that you grew yourself in your very own home. But that self-satisfaction is superseded even by the increase in flavor and the savings in both money and the waste of buying at the store. I really hope this video helps your indoor herb growing endeavors, and if it's something you never tried before but you wanted to, there's no better time than now. Hey, thanks so much for watching, guys. I appreciate the support more than you know. And if you're getting value from these videos, please like and share them to spread the word and help your fellow gardener to grow better.